This is the January 3rd, 2008 meeting of the Athens Shade Tree Commission, and the meeting is now called to order. We have the first order of business is the tree permit and right-of-way issues, and I don't have copies here for everybody on the commission, but Ann Bonner has produced, Ann Bonner, who is the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Regional Forester and consults to us, has produced a street tree information form to go to the individuals who have adopted the 14 trees that have been planted around the city. And Emily will just show this.
Is this what she had? She sent out a letter, and there was something as an attachment.
Yes, this is the attachment.
Okay, and is it the same, or have there been changes?
She made slight changes, so this is a little bit different. Anne is going to be sending them out on ODNR postage and sending them out probably Monday. So if you see any things you are uncomfortable with, circulate that around. And it's also on your computers, should be in your email. Let's see. In other comments, we still do not see anything happening at the two ash trees that were damaged by tree service working for College Park condos, city trees in front of Hungry Howie's, and we'll be reminding them about that. And then we also had a call from someone about a silver maple at 24 Hudson, which I think Ron Lucas had done some deadwood pruning on, perhaps. It is in decline, but you looked at it, did you not?
I looked at it. It is definitely a mature tree in decline. On the positive end, probably about 90% of the branches were still alive, but there was definitely a number of large branches that have snapped off over the years, leaving me suspicious about rot in the middle. Nothing is going over the house exactly, but there's quite a few branches over the sidewalk leading to the house and the street sidewalk.
Anne looked at it and deemed that it was not a hazard at this time, but just bore watching. And I will call the individual who called code enforcement, I think, about this, and let her know that we're keeping an eye on it. But in the course of doing assessments on that end of town, there turned out to be quite a number of other trees that just came up just this afternoon. And at 63 Home, there are two large sugar maples, I think, and said that she deems hazards, and she thinks should come down. And at 406 Elmwood, there is also a large maple, which might be a candidate for deadwood pruning. I think she said, deadwood pruning she would suggest for 406 Elmwood. And at 152 Morris, kind of between those two addresses, there's a hard maple declining and dropping limbs, and she thought that might be a candidate for removal also. So, if
that's one that's come up before,
and it has, and it's been deadwood pruned, I think.
It's been said to be okay.
Yes,
but
it's had a hard, it's had a drought, near drought.
Well, some of these, unless I think they're obvious hazards, we have to wait until spring to make sure.
For the two on Home Street, she said she didn't think that was necessary.
Okay.
And in fact, that this is a good time to do some removals and maybe even get a good rate for having several things in one area. And these are large trees.
Oh, yeah.
And,
The one at 150 Morris.
yeah. If people would, on the commission, would go look at 406 Elmwood and 152 Morris to confirm that. But the two at 63 Home, unless anybody has a strong reason not to, I think we ought to ask the city to start a contract and. Emily, you had okay.
I was making notes.
Are there any other tree permit or right-of-way issues? Anybody? Landscape ordinance issues, have we received a revised
Not
version
yet.
of this site?
I met with David Callahan before the new year.
Yeah, identify the site for.
This is the Bob's Landmark site, where there's a large single building development going in. Turns out that there are a lot of high voltage cables around this site, which weren't originally identified on the plans. And when I visited the site with David Callahan, I pointed this out, and he's going to revise the plan. Initially, he was putting large shade trees underneath these cables, and he realised when he saw it that isn't practical.
That's gift wrapped by high voltage cables.
Yes, there's I think two small sides of this rather complex site which don't have these high voltage cables on. And so what I did was make a list of 7 possible trees that could go along the borders of the site. I'll read them off: the Elysia, Cornus Florida, Oxdendron, Amelis, a flowering cherry of some sort, the hemlock, Canadian hemlock, and the juniper. I can't remember which one it was now. Orientalis, that's it. Were the ones that I suggested he think about as possible trees for going under these lines.
Well, wouldn't the hemlock be too large?
Not apparently, particularly in the conditions that it's going to find itself in there. The canadensis appears to only go to 20 feet, according to my notes, but I could be wrong.
I've seen them much larger
certainly,
than that.
yeah.
And
yeah.
this was
This is
planted at the corner of a house.
Okay, so you've seen a street tree bigger than that, then?
Well, not a street tree.
Okay, yeah. Because these are all pretty tough sites that we're talking about.
And I also wondered about the cherry, because those are not as healthy and long-lived as many of the other smaller trees. And as street trees particularly, I would wonder.
The difficulty here is you're going to be dealing with small, medium-sized trees, and medium-sized trees by definition tend not to be long-lived. From what I can see.
But cherry in this area tends not to be long-lived, even under the best circumstances.
Yeah. All I was giving him was a list of 7.
Okay,
if you can come up with some more for me to pass to him, I will certainly pass them on.
Okay.
Another, as much as I love the hemlock, it's supposed to be in a decline in this area. And I've forgotten what the problem is, but
Some kind of fungus
Yeah.
or
It's much worse in the northeast, but it's coming this way.
So,
Would you email me that list that you just read out?
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, and then if you can suggest some other ones, and I'll just pass them on to
Okay.
David Callahan. He is going to check and see if the cables are staying, but at the moment he's going to plan as if they're not. I did ask that he include a couple of little leaf lindens in some premium spots between the wings of the building. Seem to be 2 planting sites crying out for large shade trees.
That
And he will
sounds
be
good.
able to plant some large shade trees in the parking lot, in the middle of the lot. But it is surrounded by these high voltage cables. The other thing we discussed was the possibility of planting trees along the border between that site and Ambassador Laundry, because Ambassador Laundry's building is quite low, and there is quite a large green space between the edge of the parking lot and that building. So I've asked him to consider that area as a possible planting site. Because initially he just got, I think, some viburnums, and I can't think what the other thing was now. Do you remember? There were those things that were being planted in groups, and the viburnums were thought to be too close together, and was it a juniper? Small juniper of some sort? Anyway, it was basically shrubs that were being put in there, so I asked that all he was doing was he wanted some initial input, and so we tried to get together with Albie to do this, but it didn't quite work. So he's going to come back with a plan later for the Commission to look at.
Thank you very much. yesterday, we were walking around out there, 20 degrees.
Yeah, it was
blowing.
cold and windy.
The next item is a landscape ordinance revision has been given to City Council to work on. And I trust we'll be hearing from them as they look at it. But for the moment, it's off our desks and will be called upon at some point to comment, I'm sure. Any comments about that?
Well, I think the thing to do is just to find out when they're going to have it discussed in committee so that
Yeah,
we
that
can
would-
be there.
Yes. And we do not have, for our fourth item, still is no more data on the Emerald Ash borer. Anne couldn't attend tonight, but she's been pursuing that, so we'll just have to wait until the February meeting, I think, to hear. Anne also had some information, actually this information has been around the city in various offices about the potential for an application for an Ohio Department of Transportation Gateway Grant. And this is the last year in which these grants are going to be quite so easily applied for and generously funded, probably. And they provide plants and plant materials to go at the entries, city entries, and it's the requirement is that there be an application by the city. Ann Bonner has volunteered to help with the technical end of any application, and she's done this in a previous application that was done, that massive planting of evergreens on the South Y area a couple years ago. The city needs to enter into an agreement about installation and maintenance. Installation would be done by volunteers, which is how it happened, the South Y planting. There is 100% payment of plants and materials like mulch. There could even be, well, of course, there would be trees, but there could even be perennials like daffodils, perhaps. The critical thing is to have a site choice and to coordinate with somebody like the streets department. So we need to see if this is a possibility. If I think the streets department is just absolutely swamped at the moment, but this is a possibility that Anne would be willing to put together. So perhaps I could call you tomorrow, Steve, to see about putting together a meeting for an ODOT Gateway Grant to see if there's any interest out there, or at least have you...
It might be good to have Ron Lucas involved in that because his immediate supervisor, Andy Stone, the director of streets, is doing a corridor study now on Richland Avenue from Bentley Hall as far down possibly as Hooper Street.
Yes,
Includes the monies committed from the Ohio Department of Transportation regarding restructuring or reconfiguration of the 682 Richland Avenue intersection. And, well, we attended that.
I attended that meeting about that project. I don't know that that project would finish in time for this. This means getting something together for potentially a planting in spring 2008 or fall 2008.
Right, that
So-
would be the only problem with applying it to that. But we do have the on-off ramps at State, East State and 33.
Yeah.
And the same thing, not nearly as visible, at 682 and 33. And then we have city entrance signs coming in West Union Street, 56, out by Kerr Distributing.
Yeah.
And we have we do have that monument area on Columbus Road just as you come into town, and on Stimson just as you come off the highway also.
Some of those things already have city plantings, but I don't. Well, we'll see whether more
I'm
could
sure
be
there
added
are
to
some-
sites
there are
like
some
that.
possibilities.
Trees or. Yeah.
I know, too, that I've had discussion with Mr. Stone about the excessive amount of mowing that's necessary at some of these intersections, and
This is-
especially the off-ramp. If you're coming off 33 and you want to go on to East State and head out toward the commercial area, there's a huge bowl-shaped area right in there that just is very time-consuming
a planting
mowing.
site.
And Andy had mentioned that he would like to plant something in there similar to the intersection up at Logan at
Yes.
33 and
Ann mentioned that one too.
yeah, and Andy really wants to, funding available or plant material available, would really like to do something on it right in that area. Of course, that would include ODOT approval because that's in the limited access highway area, but the city maintains that. So that might be a very good spot.
One of the goals is reducing mowing. It has this potential
It needs to
save
be
energy.
reduced right there, for sure.
That's a good site.
Right. Well, I will contact you and Ron. Well, our next item is the minutes to approve the minutes of the December 6th meeting. Did people read them in their email or find any things to amend? I think David Sinkoff was at the last meeting and was missing on the roll up there. And
I missed the last meeting.
did you miss last meeting?
Yeah.
I thought I got them.
Yeah, that's right.
But you're here now.
He's here.
I was here in November, but
Just
not
paying
in
attention.
December.
Let's see, and I would make a wording change for the Tree City USA. It's our 16th year.
Okay.
Been a Tree City USA. Does anybody move to accept the minutes as amended?
I so move.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The minutes are approved as amended. Is there any other business that anybody has at this time? And Steve, yes.
In response to a letter that I had sent to Mr. Eric Brannon of Lawn Masters and More
Taco Bell.
regarding Taco Bell, and it was associated, that was done on November 30th, and I gave you a copy of that at the last meeting. It's in response to September 10th letter, correction letter that was sent by the Tree Commission. I have been able to meet with Mr. Brannon today, and I have a revised plan.
Oh, wonderful.
So what he did was, he came to the office, remember there was all the controversy about how big does the sheet have to be? Well, I ended up having full-size plans, actually, resubmitted. What I did was, I went to some of the survey work that was done for the subdivision of that land and made a copy of that site survey, went to Athens County GIS and pulled off an aerial photograph in order to be able to place the apartment building on the lot adjacent. And then, this is a very rough sketch, but I sketched in the junipers, the 10 junipers that were required, and some of the trees along the edge. What I did then was on this large drawing, I'm just going to hold this up here, and then I'll bring it up too if you.
Yeah, we probably, I'll wait.
What I did was,
Oh, we still get the crinkled paper over the microphone. That's good.
what Mr. Brandon did was he just
So
reproduced
here's the
another
restaurant. There's East State Street.
sheet. Exactly. The apartment building is right down here.
The apartment building's there.
There's all those junipers.
This is the driveway up to the.
And your letter specifically said that you were concerned about the property line adjacent to the apartment.
Making sure the junipers ended up on Taco Bell property.
Yeah, so what I did was, off of this aerial photograph, and this was taken before any development. The apartment building is right here. Sketched it in, used the building plans to site the building, indicated 10 junipers, and then I indicated here also. I scaled then the property line over, so this is the property line.
So it is within.
Right here, so it's based at the total slope, as you had recommended. And then Mr. Brannon is also, from the correction letter, submitted this and corrected.
Okay.
I have, here's the original letter.
What's the distance?
Corrected.
property line? It doesn't, about 20 feet from the junipers to the property line?
The letter said place them at the toe of the slope,
Okay,
so
It
that's
was,
about as close as.
yeah, it's good.
that's what we were hoping for because we weren't sure where the property line was.
Right.
And that was why Steve did
What I did was off this and building plans, I was able to, the building plan said that the property line was 45 feet from the edge of the building, so I just scaled it over.
Mhm.
So this, and those were really the one thing that was lacking, greatest failure of the plan. There had to be some barrier between the business use and the residential
Yeah,
use.
it's got to be a buffer.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had actually plans for ones that were submitted before I had them put on over the plans to go back.
Mm-hmm.
Municipal know that this is the one that came.
Okay.
To remind,
There's also a piece about the species that are to be planted under the power lines along the side here. So we need to check that he's doing what we asked.
okay.
I would think what we should do is hold off giving final approval until we have a chance to sort of just look at it,
Really look at it carefully.
look at it carefully, make sure there's nothing else.
That's missing, or excessive, he might have overdone. We can
So I can leave all
meet in,
this
yeah. Shall we try to meet in committee, perhaps, to review this as soon as possible? Maybe this weekend before the term begins again and people's lives become,
If you like it, you can try that.
I'm
No.
available.
These were the plans that are mentioned as being redlined in your letter. And it's the location of junipers, and then it's mentioned in your correction.
okay.
Probably just these plans with these notations in this area. But at least it's,
Yeah.
see, it was all that conversation back and forth about how do I locate the property line?
Yes.
This being the most.
Steve, thank you for expediting property line information.
Yeah, see, what does he have listed up there? at the top?
Thank you very much. You know, I'm
Ficus.
very fond of those. Paper clips.
Red maple.
Okay.
Yeah, let's read this off and see.
Something else that I can read.
Freeman?
More like Frank's.
Yeah, well, that's what we need to. I don't think we should try and make a decision tonight. We should just look at it carefully,
Yeah, there are
and
no.
then if we have questions, we'll.
Right. Yeah, if you have any questions, you can just let me know, and I can get in contact with Mr. Brennan
is
about
Frank's
Brandon and make
red
sure that any of those corrections
maple that
necessary
looks
can
like-
be made to that drawing.
Yeah, okay.
He's
Well,
starting to line out his work for.
It's what we said in the letter was we wanted them to switch them, some of the switch the swamp white oaks with the smaller red maples, put the small species under the power lines. So that's what we need to make sure is happening.
And I think we should find out for sure what red maple that is.
Yeah, I think there was some question perhaps, but, well, this is good. The juniper is on the, for the screening of the residential area. This is what we really had hoped for.
It says Autumn Spire and October Glory and Frank's Reed are the three red maples he's got.
okay.
Frank's Reed.
So that could be Frank's Reed is the one that he's talking about putting.
Or
on.
Frank's red.
Frank's Red, sorry, yeah.
Is anyone familiar with that?
Well,
I mean, could it be a columnar?
Well, we'll have to find out. We'll
Look
can
that
get a
up.
phone.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll, otherwise we run the risk of, yeah, I know.
We'll look in that later.
I don't think it's in there.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, we need,
Okay.
but this looks really
Yep, looks like a good plan.
hopeful and likely to satisfy. We just want to make sure that he's not got an error with the maples there. And I, let's see, can I get a group of people looking at the species possibly this weekend, when the species review, perhaps Sunday? Is that a possibility?
Yes, that's a possibility. Yeah.
Okay, and that way we can perhaps have the response early next week. And that way we won't have the term cascade over us and the process. Okay, let us say Sunday evening, perhaps, 7-ish?
Yeah,
All
that's
right.
fine.
Okay.
Unusual places.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for moving that along. And the property line issue was difficult. You,
Good way to get the solution, I think.
yeah. Thank you. Oh, is there any other
Yes.
business?
I'd given you a copy of a correction letter that I'd sent to Alltel about the death of the plantings around the cell phone tower, where the flag's located on the tower, by the wastewater treatment plant.
Right.
I've not received a response to that letter yet. Also, I'd given you a copy of a correction letter that I sent to Mr. Rick Rose at Bennigan's, right next door to Taco Bell. I had to send that certified mail because it was an order to comply, because there were some zoning violations also. I received a return receipt on the certified letter, but have not received a response yet. So very shortly, I'll be forwarding that information to the law director for further legal action.
They have more erosion happening at that Bennigan site, at the areas where they didn't put up barricades because there's still nothing to keep water coming straight off the parking lot.
Right. If you go there and look, and I'd talked to Mr. Brannon about that today, because Taco Bell has curbing, and right across the street there's curbing on the parking lot at Ruby Tuesdays. Now, curbing's not required by the zoning code, but sediment and erosion control and keeping erosion down is. You could kill two birds with one stone. With curbing, it would keep the cars off the trees, plus control the water.
Yeah.
But like I say, I haven't received any response, and I showed you at the last meeting, I think the pile of communications and information to be forwarded to the law director is sufficient to proceed with some possible additional action beyond what I can do.
And the landscape ordinance does require some protection for
Exactly.
trees, so that will help. Yeah. Okay, is there any other?
I just got one question. Our website. What's
Ah.
happening? Because I've got all these minutes from 2007. I'd like to be able to file them somewhere. And the website's a good
Yes.
place to put them.
I will contact you.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be good. And really, you might just email everything you've got to Steve for the moment, because they often have to dig into or have reference to our minutes about things. Usually I can find things fairly fast if you call
There's
me.
been some correspondence about plantings around a planned unit development on Carpenter Street a while back that we had to communicate back and forth, and I couldn't locate a copy of the minutes from that meeting. And so, that'll really help me when I write the correction letter.
Yeah.
As an example of my ready access to the minutes.
If you wouldn't mind emailing him that batch, and I will inquire about the website.
I have lots of files. Let's create another one for you.
At
That'd be
least
all right.
there's, don't take up much physical space, but is there any other business?
I had a question. Do we know when we'll get another council representative?
They have to meet and determine that.
So maybe in February. We signify by their turning up at the meeting.
Yes.
And the other question I had, maybe Steve can answer. We've talked about signs before, businesses, and I noticed that that Kroger's has now, instead of having a lollipop sign, has the lower. I don't know whether it qualifies as a monument sign or not, but has there been a new ruling on that, or are they just complying with the master plan or whatever?
I had presented to the Planning Commission quite a few months ago some initial information about changeable copy electronic signs, and it evolved into a discussion about temporary signs and then a possible revision to the entire sign ordinance. The sign ordinance has not been revised. Kroger's installed that sign on their own. I don't know about you, to me, I get a much different feeling on East State Street now from when they had the big cube, and now that sign's there. It's much lower, at least in perspective, much smaller.
It's in sight as well as you drive along. I like
Yes.
You can actually see
And,
it.
and the Hampton Inn, isn't that a lower sign also?
Yes, yes, it is, and that, they did that themselves voluntarily. If you go out there too, if you look at the sign for the Holiday Inn Express, it's around the corner by the swimming pool, the public pool there. It's the same type low sign. I think what a lot of businesses are starting to understand is they're not advertising to the next county. They're advertising to someone or trying to have someone find them who's at street level. And these signs have been, are much more effective visually. An example from way in the past would be when Hardee's was over at the location where the Lollipop's at now, and they had a huge sign. And they dropped it down because they wanted to get the message down on the street and not way up in the air. So people are doing this voluntarily, I guess is the answer
Okay,
to the question.
great.
It's a voluntary response, and the sign ordinance has not yet been changed.
Okay, thank you.
In relationship, if I might comment too, on council committee assignments, my understanding is that the president of council early in council's term does committee assignments. I actually spoke to Mayor Weil at the Planning Commission today to see if he knew who might replace him as the committee chair of the Environmental Committee. But that's yet to be determined by council. But early on in the council term, the president, to my understanding, will appoint committees. So stay tuned, I guess, then, for that one.
Is there anything else? If not, motion to adjourn. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Steve, for really hard work on Taco Bell.